Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name is Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 89 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. All right, when you keep moving the stone around, so you're sitting in the same place, it looks like you're not going anywhere. Working on a different part of the stone now, and this is cut really close. You should be able to see just right here. There's almost no difference. I got to take off not even 1/8 of an inch down at the bottom on this down here. That's how close, and all the rest of this is just about perfect. But because we pushed this side in, down in here, we had to push this in. So I've got more of an overhang on the top. I have to take about 1/4 inch off. Well, if you check it up here, this margin down here is, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. And that's all in the overhang up top. So I want to, there's different ways you could do it. Now, I could just be bold and say, yeah, that looks pretty good, and take a saw and go right down here and cut some off. And the problem with going fast, especially towards the end of something, is that's usually when you'll screw it up. And it may just be how you perceive it, because when you're doing it early, if something happens, it isn't really a screw up because you're not doing the actual finished end work. At the end, you got to be careful. You got to slow down a little bit and really put the effort into not going too fast. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a 16 point, which is it takes off a lot finer stone than a regular 9 point will. 9 point, I don't know if you can really tell the difference on the camera, but you can see how much smaller the teeth are. 9 point, 16 point, 4 rows of 4, 3 rows of 3. And we really have to be careful at this point about stunning the stone, about bruising it. Now, you usually don't think about bruising or stunning, putting stuns in granite like you do marble. Marble's really, Giuliano says, no, people can't carve both unless they really, when you're just starting. He says, because if you're used to carving granite, you'll just plow right through marble, and you'll break it, and you'll bruise it, and you'll damage it. And that's true to a certain point. But I'd spent years carving ice before I ever started carving stone. So I had a pretty good idea on about impact, how much energy I was imparting into the job. And so, even he agrees, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Most people don't carve a lot of ice. If you're going to practice carving stone, carve ice. There's nothing like it. Nothing. I think it's the best metaphor for stone, the best medium to practice in, especially if you don't have the ability in terms of materials and equipment and everything else to carve stone. You can put some ice, a box in your freezer with a plastic bag in it, and fill it with water, and you can carve it easily. And you can really get a feel for how things carve and how they break in terms of crystalline, solid crystalline work like stone is. But anyways, so what I did on this big overhang, I could take a saw, and I can saw this bulk off, and theoretically I'm good enough, it won't make any difference, I won't make a mistake. Yeah, all right. Remember I told you how the more you do, I'm not a master, the more I do, the less I know, and the more I learn, the less I know, because I understand how things can come back and bite you. So I could also take a small hand set, or even just a straight chisel, and chip this off. What I absolutely don't want to do right now, because of the way this stone is breaking with the head grain going up and down, is I don't want to have a piece break and pull a chunk out of this face that I can't resolve. Now, you see a couple little things here where I've already finished it, but I'm going to tip that and remove about half of that depth. And then after I do that, I'll have to scrape it a little bit to finish up these lines. There's no reason for me to scrape this to death until after I've tipped it and made a nice straight edge. Then I can true it all up and it'll look great. So this is fine. What I did, I took a 16 point, I broke this corner, pushed it down till it's about the width of the tool. You got to be really careful because you don't want it to skitter across the polish, bugger up the stone. Now this is still proud. Now I'm going to take, I relieve this, I took away the stone underneath, again, just with a 9 point. I didn't use the saw, I don't want to go too deep. Now I'm going to take my chisel and I'm going to break this off in 2 or 3 courses. I won't just go all the way deep and push it hard. I'll break it and then I'll cut it and then I'll cut it and then I'll work back up to this edge and then I'll fine tune that actual depth in conjunction with the bottom like I've been doing using my pattern. So go slow. And while you're doing this, I wanted to compare some tools. Remember I told you how tools will change in terms of their dimension as we sharpen them. I'm just hogging through chisel. I'm almost done that straight, square, 5/8. This one's still good, but I got to retire this one because it's close to short. You'll find that some tools have more mass. It's a heavier tool than another one, and that weight, and it's not pounds. It's not even ounces generally. Sometimes it can be ounces. If you've got a straight chisel and it's on a shank that's drawn way out and real skinny, maybe a very light chisel. That mass has an impact. No pun intended. That has an effect on how that tool cuts, and you may find that a heavier tool will take off material better because it has more mass versus a lighter tool which will tend to ride and stay on top more easily. And one may be more suitable for certain applications than another. So just because the tool is short, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. You may even want to put it aside and save it because there's certain things, like when I'm down on this edge, I don't want to have to lean on it hard down here to fix this. I want a tool that's just going to cut it. But if I'm doing something where I want to sneak up on a detail, like I've got, because this is so close to perfect. I don't need to take out like any stone, just a little layer of dust. I don't want anything to dig and then have a line that I got to take out. So I probably will use the lighter tool. And it's the same thing with your other chisels. You'll find that some tools, they have different performances, and that develops as you become more involved with carving, and you can notice it. But this one's a lot heavier than this one, and so this one does certain tasks, and this one does certain tasks as I'm carving. Well, let's put this together here. I'm gonna put on my gear. I'll be back in a second, and I'll show you. We'll cut this off, work it down in a few steps. when you're doing this, you spend a lot of time holding this tool by that bolt. You'll support it like this, and then you pinch it. You don't grab it, but you spend more time resting it on that finger to support it. And then you can hold it and guide it the way you want. Okay, I've removed all of the overhang. This is still a little bit tall. Now I have to scrape this down, and as I relieve this, as I scrape this down and get this leveled up, it's going to be closer to the top, and I'll tip the top just a little bit more, and I can just shave that last little bit off. Because I want this to cut, I'm going to use the heavier tool. At the end here is to get this blended. We want it to be very close to the pattern, but we want the pattern to help us understand how consistent this surface is, so that if we have something that's a little off because we may have had a chip pop out and we had to go a little bit deep, we might have to carry that surface irregularity or that difference. We may have to carry it over a length in order to blend it to make it disappear. So it doesn't have to fit the pattern necessarily absolutely perfect all the time, but the pattern should be very close and your result should be very consistent across the whole piece, because we want it to look the same. What's going to stand out is things that don't look the same. If they look different, you're going to notice it. That's the benefit of these pipes. You can really reconfigure them. should give you a pretty good idea, and I need to show you the whole thing. You've already seen it. Work this down and go carefully, because what we need to do is this has to be very consistent all the way across. Work with our pattern, make it consistent, and then we'll get to the ends here shortly. I should mention, just to make sure I mention, when I'm pushing this in, okay, I'm not pushing in square, because if I push up, it's apt to break this off. It could dig a hole out here. I don't want to do that. It probably won't, but I don't want it. So when I'm working, and this is a little exaggerated to show you, I got it tipped like this, so I'm pushing down into the center of the stone, down away from that edge. So I'm not imparting any energy up, because I don't want to break this up. I want to break this down with another chisel. So while I'm doing this, I've got it just at a slight angle. Not a lot, you don't have to be a ton, but I do have it angled. Instead of being horizontal, it's tipped up like this. That's a good way to work that in. As you're working this, you're apt to have some horizontal lines that are obvious. You can see them. They're just a witness. They're not a dimension or anything. There's just enough to catch a shadow. I've said it before, you can't dig your way out of the hole. The problem when you start doing your final axing is if you take your chisel, your scraper, you go up and down. Like I've got a small line right here. I don't know if I can turn it. I probably can't lighten it enough so y'all can see it. And I can still see it to fix it. Right there, there's a small line. But the pattern fits pretty good right there. If I take my chisel, my straight chisel, and I try to scrape that out, I'm probably going to make it worse. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to come up to that little dip where that line is, and my chisel's going to follow that dip, follow that dip, and follow that dip. The way to fix it better is to lower the two sides of the dip, not touch the dip, but lower the sides. When you're in a concave area like that, that's really tough to do. The easier way to approach it is to take, use a regular round chisel, but they'll tend to dig because they're too narrow. Get a wide curved chisel, scraper. And we're going to just hit it very lightly on a crosshatch. We're going to have the tool diagonal at about a 45-degree angle to that line. We're going to go one way, and we're going to go the other way. What that's going to do is on each side of that dip, it won't touch the low spot, but it should rough up each shoulder going into that dip. And then we can go over it, come up to it very carefully with the scraper, clean it all off. Do the same thing when I've got a contact, say over here, and it's contacted. Say it's hitting right there. The rest of this curve's pretty good. Instead of trying to approximate that curve too much, I'm just as apt to take a scraper, a round scraper, and work it on a bias one way, and then work it on the other way. And then I can go and clean the tops of those tool marks. The tops of the ridges will come off really easy with a scraper, and I get a nice smooth sculpture. See if we can do a little bit here, just to show you. 3/4 inch machine, really well broken in. That's a better fit. Now at the end of this, what's all this is? This is important to learn how to do with using your curve scraper and using it to produce a cove. When I say a cove, if I cut with this chisel like this, I've got a very definitive curve, okay, whatever it came off the grinder. If I rotate this, I've got that curve, but it's over a shorter distance. It has a different impact. It can make a different contour on your stone. That's why you don't need 50 different chisels that each have a different curve on them. You don't do that with at least with granite you don't. I know with marble people have a whole array of chisels and they'll have one little one for every little curve on their thing. I think it's necessary, you know. Maybe it is for you. I don't know. I don't. Not me. I'll cove it. I'll turn it to the side, cove it. But when this is all wrapped up, when I'm ready to finish this edge, we'll tip this edge, get that ready, and then as I start axing this, it's like cutting in on painting. You're painting around a window or something, and you go and you cut everything. You go around all your details and put a stripe or a line or whatever, and then you can paint right up to them. You don't have to paint right to the end when you're doing your mass work. You cut everything in. We're going to cut in these edges to get those right, but I'm going to take my curve scraper, and normally what you'll do on a panel, you know, and this is just a curved panel, I'm going to take this chisel, this curved one, and I'll do a 45, and I'll do a 45 over the entire span from one end to the other, okay? And then I'll go 45 the other direction, and I'll cross hatch it, the whole thing. And because this is a curve going up, I'm not going to try to scrape it like this because it's too easy to bugger it up. If I cross hatch it, you know, if you cross hatch it both ways, you know, 4 times, diagonal, diagonal, vertical, horizontal, you'll eliminate all your tool marks for the most part, and the last orientation is the one that'll tend to catch light and tend to demonstrate. So we'll do a 45 the whole panel, 45 the whole panel, and then I'll probably go through and I'll have like a shaven sharp, razor sharp chisel and a real soft hammer, and I'll just scrape the whole thing. I'll try to blend this edge in particular, because what's going to happen is in low light, when we got shadows, is you're going to see this roughness if it's there. However much roughness you're going to see it. This is probably going to hold light all the time, but it's also, if there's any deep divots, it's going to hold dirt. And that's where you get into wetness down here on this bottom edge. So I'll have to very carefully scrape this, and I'll probably use a really sharp, smaller round chisel. And I'll go right down this bottom edge both ways to scrape this edge in, because if I have big obvious marks or wetness or anything, or tool marks down in here, as dust blows around and dirt blows around and lands on here and water runs down, it's all going to collect right here, and it's going to show. You're going to see it. You're not going to think about that for, you know, realistically, probably a few years. Someday maybe I'll go out and show you. I'll take some video of the gargoyle because it's nearby, and it's a carving, and it's got, it looks good now because it's dirty, but it's well axed, so it's pretty clean. When we put this in the cemetery first, it's going to be really hot. It's going to be really bright, and then it's going to start getting dirty. It'll subdue, and you know, in a few years, it'll look like it's been there a lot longer. The first 2 or 3 years, it's going to stick out like somebody's got a light bulb. But we've got to axe this whole thing. So learn how to do this, to camouflage, clean things up, and look at what's nasty and what's not. Learn to use your tool as in a cove position, one way, the other way, and then we'll go back over it. You know, we could go over it like this, but matching this cove is matching this actual scotia curve. It's too easy to dig with one of these corners, so we're not going to do it. We're just going to do diagonal, diagonal, and then we'll scrape the whole thing like this to make it look nice and long. The long lines will be lateral, they'll travel along, and try to get this edge, particularly here in the front, cleaned up, and it'll look great. So, yeah, that is tedious, but man, it's cool when this stuff comes together, and it's just all done. And so, I'm hanging on for dear life. Try not to pop an edge and making it great. And I'm just burning up carbide. Just going through grindstones and carbide, making it work. So I'll keep digging on this, and we'll probably wrap this video up. We're probably in good shape now. Enjoying the nice weather carving before it gets crazy hot. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio with the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship.